You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. So, trouble brewing ahead in the Atlantic with two tropical cyclones currently active in the basin. Of course, we are quite familiar now with Tropical Storm Laura with winds of 45 miles per hour. Tropical storm warnings abound across many of the Lesser Antilles over to the Greater Antilles. And on the other side of the Caribbean, we've got the coast of Mexico, which you can almost see on the screen here. And Tropical Depression 14L, which still hasn't got its name just yet. That is, unless things changed at that advisory that just came out from National Hurricane Center, but I'm pretty sure it hasn't. Indeed, it has not. So we're still left with those two systems right now, and people getting rather concerned over both of these as we continue to track them. We've also got a tropical depression in the Western Pacific, which we'll look at a later time, but we can take questions on all of them during tonight's stream. My name is Nathan Foy. I'm joined by the team, which tonight consists of several people who are somewhat unfamiliar faces, some of them. We've got Amy, Codemo, Mike, Rain, Strat, Euxinator, and Wyatt. Good evening to you all.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Why did it do that?
What happened?
Well, there we go. It's just, that's wonderful. There's another view. That's the Western Pacific cyclone, Tropical Depression 9. I wasn't expecting it to switch like that, but okay, we'll switch it like that. Fine. And what do we want to talk about first today? Because there's a few things that we can pick up on. Laura, is that the big one for you guys?
I think so, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So where do you want to begin then? Laura is, it could look stronger than it currently is. It's still struggling a little bit, 45 miles per hour. You must forgive me because I've only just returned from vacations, so I've only seen Laura for about 3 hours. But what has been your impressions of the storm throughout today?
It's definitely an interesting system. I mean, the fact that its track is completely changed and the fact that there perhaps is a center relocation possible is a little bit frightening, especially because of the way the track will take it, going potentially under Florida, I think it is right now, and then going into areas in Louisiana.
Here's a look at the Gulf of Mexico as well. Let's see if we can pan down there. You can get, there we are, the shape of Tropical Depression 14. Now, I saw several people in our community say earlier today that they're surprised that the National Hurricane Center are forecasting an actual hurricane out of this.
Yeah. I mean, it is possible based on current conditions. And it does look like it might be trying to get its act together, as you can tell by lots of convection that has been firing throughout the day, and that does look like it has persisted. So, yeah. I wouldn't completely 100% rule it out, but I don't really know. We'll have to just stay tuned for that.
The fact that it's generally struggled to have early organization despite favorable conditions does make it more difficult for it to really potentially reach hurricane intensity, either before a landfall on the Yucatan Peninsula or a potential one. If changes keep on going that really forces to the north that could technically be barely avoided. There's a hurricane watch there in parts of the peninsula right now, or even in the Gulf of Mexico. If it can't take advantage of the favorable conditions now, it's going to be more difficult for it to do it later on.
Yep, so there are the two systems. Let's look at the Eastern Pacific. There's not too much going on here now. Genevieve is dead. That became official earlier this afternoon, actually. There it is. You can still see its circulation, its remnants steaming up towards the northwest there. And over in the Western Pacific, there we have that new system that's developing at 9W, which JTWC and JMA think could rapidly intensify over the next few days. Any thoughts on this one?
It's definitely a situation that's not very good. So what are the exact tracks forecasting? Is it still kind of split between
Well, now it's
China,
sort
or
of
is it?
looking at a South Korea landfall as a major typhoon here in about 4 or
Oh.
5 days.
Oh wow, that's not very good at all.
The track yesterday was a bit more murky because there wasn't really a full center yet that was actually closed, but it was showing something really strange, at least yesterday, pulling out further east towards the Ryukyu Islands, and then, or at least the northeastern ones, closer to Kyushu, which is the southernmost main island of Japan, and then pulling it very hard back to the west and north towards South Korea. Now that we have a center, the latest JTWC forecast track is much more in line with a general northeastward motion with then just a turn straight north to potentially make landfall in South Korea as a high-end Category 2 or even Category 3 storm, depending on the exact time that you really take a look at it on the map. So definitely a concerning scenario that's going to have to be monitored very closely over the coming days.
There's another look at Tropical Depression 14, but everyone is really thinking about, I almost called it Hannah then, we're getting completely lost with all this storm names. Laura, which is located there on the far right-hand side of the image, and you can see some cloud tops bubbling up, but its structure doesn't look great right now, and it really some questions as to whether it will survive moving over the Greater Antilles, which looks like that's going to happen now. I'm still a little bit skeptical, even though others are really going off the deep end right now, models included.
A lot of it's really going to come down to if it reforms its center again or not. If it reforms its center again where the mid-level center is significantly further to the east, then it's going to have potentially more time to move a bit further north and gain more latitude and avoid more direct impacts with a lot of the Greater Antilles. If that happens, then down the line, it could potentially be more favorable for additional intensification into a stronger hurricane, potentially. But if it really keeps its current center, and that one, keep in mind, is actually still moving south of the 5 p.m. forecast point.
Where is the center?
It's already west of Antigua and Barbuda.
Right.
As of the 8 p.m. spot.
Yeah,
so if that
sense.
continues and it keeps that center, and not to mention, not only is it moving further south than initially anticipated, but it's also going faster as well, it's more likely that it'll have longer and more direct land impacts with Hispaniola and Cuba, which could, in that scenario, blow up the storm completely and kill it off before it can really enter the Gulf of Mexico. But that really goes to explain the wide range of scenarios that are possible with the system and how it really is very murky and low confidence in terms of the exact intensity that this system could be as we head to the middle of next week and it's making a closer approach to the United States.
We're going to dive into questions shortly, and just to let you know, this is only a 1-hour production tonight, but we do have 3 other streams running right now. The main 24/7 hurricane tracker, which keeps you abreast of everything on our main YouTube channel, and Force 13 US is currently running satellite feeds of both Laura and Tropical Depression 14. Now, there is a hurricane watch in effect for TD14. Stretches from Punta Herrero to Cancun in Mexico. And some people were shocked by that as well. I wonder if anyone wants to provide comment on that. Or maybe not.
I think a lot of it really goes down to the forecast discussion, really.
There they are, the forecast
They
counts,
do
yeah.
specifically note, National Hurricane Center in the 5 p.m. discussion, that it's been a bit surprising. They actually say, as a quote, it's a bit of a mystery why the depression has struggled to develop much central convection, given a seemingly low shear environment and warm waters. But that because conditions are still expected to be very favorable up until initial landfall in the Yucatan Peninsula, that they expect it to intensify into at least a strong tropical storm near hurricane force at that point, which is why they have the hurricane watches in place in case it exceeds their current mean expectation.
2 things to note on this graphic here, and it's both to do with the the intermediate advisories. On the left-hand side, Laura, very pronounced how it's going further south than the cone. It's destroying the cone almost. So that's going to be a big shift south if it continues like that for another 3 hours. That'll be very interesting to see where that ends up. Although it could be a collision course with Hispaniola, and that would destroy the storm probably. Although maybe it'll take a tip from Isaias. Let's not. And in the case of Tropical Depression 14, you can see how there the center point at 8 p.m. is almost where the 11. I assume that's, or is it the 2 a.m. point is? In any case, it is going faster than anticipated according to their last forecast, so that's also interesting.
It also appears to be going a little bit more north as well.
Ever so slightly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is notable right now that at least compared to yesterday, with 14L at least, that, it was much more anticipated to see a landfall in the Yucatan Peninsula because the first center reformation to the south and west of the prior location meant that it looked like one was going to happen, and that the system ended up being further west, at least in its initial stages. But at that point, the actual expected landfall spot potentially in America, or a close approach, was further to the east. But since it reformed it again to the north and east, it actually avoided a technical landfall in the Honduras-Nicaragua border region. And at this point, really, the core of the system, if that trend continues, could try to either barely skirt the Yucatan Peninsula on the very edge, or even try to avoid a landfall. That is a possibility in the cone of uncertainty. The 2 a.m. on Sunday point really has it barely scraping over land, so it could try to shift a little bit to the east and then potentially try to avoid a direct landfall. That would, of course, have potential future implications down the line.
All right. Let's talk about Recon, because there's a question about that. What are they up to today? Does anyone know?
Yep. Well, there is one in Laura right now, actually.
There is?
And I think, is that two or three? It depends on the exact location. There's one in Laura and in 14L right now.
Right.
As for speaking. And that's where the potential talk of a center relocation is coming into the east for Laura, because the initial spot further to the west, which right now at least is already west of Antigua and Barbuda, seems to really be falling apart a bit. And there's talks of the mid-level center, which is more embedded in convection, trying to form a new low-level center.
Looks like it would be very close to Guadalupe if it was to be the case.
Yeah, so a lot of the future forecasting is really going to come down to when this system gets a solid center of circulation and keeps it for more than a few hours before having a new one try to come in and the initial one try to spin away from the main convection areas. And then for 14L, still no tropical storm force winds found by Recon, but they are going for the northeastern quadrant right now, so maybe we'll actually see something finally come out of this, but not particularly clear at the moment.
Now, so far on these... Go ahead.
Just to know, Recon hasn't made a good center pass yet. They're still lacking data, which is they are currently about to make another center pass in the next hour or so. So we'll have data on that shortly.
Now, so far the models have been hopeless, but they're starting to get a bit of a grip on these systems now. What have the developments been today?
Well, center relocation, going back to what Stress said, center relocation is expected to shift to the north, and that's what the models have been hinting, especially the HWRF model, which with the 18Z run has shifted an 80-mile shift north, because it expects that now the 12Z run expected that it would go through the northern Antilles and the Greater Antilles and perhaps fall apart and not make it, but now it expects that the center relocation to the north could expect it to intensify to perhaps even Cat 4.
Yeah, a lot of the specific storm models like the HWRF and the HMON have gotten really bullish with this one, with the 18Z runs out, and the GFS even, which hasn't really picked up too much on intensifying storms in the Atlantic, is trying to pick this up into a stronger system in the Gulf of Mexico. And overall, it is probable to some extent that it will have favorable conditions if the exact center survives, but a lot of that is still coming down right now to what happens in the next 24 to 36 hours with the center of relocation potentially ongoing. So it's going to be very hard to get an exact pin down on that until we see something really either form up or fail to form, and then there's going to be a much more clear synopsis, really, of information on where this could be heading at an exact, more clear intensity than right now, because it is notable for both systems, really, in the Atlantic at least, that their intensity forecasts are of lower confidence than usual.
And the HWRF has gone off the deep end with their latest forecast.
Yeah, aren't they doing a Category 5 peak or near a Category 5 peak right now?
Pretty much.
But I mean, to be fair, while Category 5 sounds ridiculous, the HWRF has probably been the most accurate this year.
Doesn't mean it's gonna be right this time though, so don't be
That is true.
going in
That
a
is true.
bunker.
Well,
That is
we've
true.
seen how often
That is
things
true.
have failed to verify before, but then on the flip side, you do get the ones that aren't expected to do things that end up doing things, Dorian, and then you get things like
Let's consider
Isaias that were expected to do a little bit more than it did for Florida, etc., which it didn't because it collapsed over Andros Island, and many of the storms in the past as well, but we're still very early on in this storm's life cycle. Let's take some more questions then, because we've got plenty that came in. Could Laura go under Cuba, as in south of Cuba there? The answer is definitely could do.
It's a possibility. I mean, the models aren't currently saying it will, but this, the uncertainty right now with how this center relocation will work, it's a possibility. So just it's best to just keep an eye on the storm.
Will Laura become a Category 2 before Florida?
It's possible.
Yeah, it depends on which part of Florida as well you're talking about.
It
Yes,
could,
models have
whether
been
it will,
hinting.
we'll see. Could Laura's centre reform east? We were discussing that just now, weren't we, Strat? And you're thinking yes, it could?
It's a very distinct possibility right now, especially if the old low-level center really continues to decay off, because multiple times you've had the initial low-level center in the past 36 hours with the system run off to the north or to the west ahead of the actual core convection, and then the mid-level center spin down a new one. And if that happens again, that will have significant implications, but it's really down to when and how that really fully develops, and a lot for intensity down the line. Again, that's going to have huge implications down the line as well. And unfortunately, really, that means a lot of the intensity forecasts, past day 2 even, are very difficult to see accurately at all right now, which is why the National Hurricane Center hasn't changed their day 4 to 5 intensity expectations in about 36 hours, because they're doing their best to stay in the middle of the model consensus in light of the complete uncertainty that surrounds this system and its very complex potential land interactions with Hispaniola and Cuba and Puerto Rico. And that doesn't even get into the potential interactions that it could have with 14L down the line if they try to get close enough to each other.
Will they, though?
Probably not close enough to have very significant interactions, because 14L's track, as it's in the Gulf of Mexico, has shifted west in the expectations that it'll really curve off towards potentially central Texas now, and if trend continues, trying to get towards southern Texas if that trend doesn't change. So if Laura's track had changed the way it had today in expectations, but 14L's track was the same as yesterday, then it'd be much more likely. You're not really going to see that as much of a likely outcome for the time being.
I just want to point this out that the HWRF, its model shows a Fujiwara interaction between 14L and Laura, by the way, as Laura eats 14L like Wilma ate Alpha in 2005.
No.
Oh, no.
Well, I mean, yeah, Fujiwara is something that has been at least on the back of the minds for some of us with this situation, as these two storms are going to at least get the potential to get close enough to interact. So it's definitely something there. And if the model's predicting it, it's not meaning it's going to happen, although it's, something to keep in mind again.
And there's that model spread there on the screen. That's rather interesting. So there's not really any models that take it to the east of Florida at this point, so they're pretty sure that it's going to go west.
Yeah, I mean, that's been an increasingly constant development over the past couple days, that it's more likely to see the system go south of Florida now. If the center reforms significantly further to the east, you might see a bit of a kink northward as models completely adjust to that. But if it keeps its current center or doesn't have one really form as far off to the east, then you're in a situation where a more southerly and westerly system is possible.
I saw a few questions asking about Florida. Is Florida safe now, and will Florida see tropical storm conditions? I think Florida is not necessarily out of the blue just yet, and I think that Florida will still see tropical storm conditions. If you're talking about hurricane conditions, I think, unless it's really close to Florida, I don't think we'll see them.
Yeah. Let's see what else we've got here. Can Laura or 14L hit the bottom of Texas near Brownsville?
It's probably not. Yeah, it's probably not Laura that's gonna affect
14.
Texas. Yeah, it'd be 14 that'd be doing that. And yeah, it's a possibility. Probably, as the current models from the NHE suggest, probably going to make a landfall as a tropical storm. But it's quite far out, and it's still quite uncertain right now, as it has been with this system.
The
And an
18Z
interesting
models-
point, a very, very small area of Louisiana is actually under both cones.
Oh,
That is quite
Oh,
interesting. It's
no.
probably going to be the southwestern quadrant of the state that's technically under both. A little sliver of it, I presume.
Tiny little bit there.
It's going to be the smallest really fraction. That's mainly, right now at least, at least of the 18Z runs, the significant model spread for even day 4 or 3 for 14L, which ranges from the GFS on the far southern side of the envelope closer to Brownsville. So if that were to happen, they'd be more likely to get at least some sort of impacts, although unclear exactly how strong a system it'd be at that point, with the furthest east ones much closer to New Orleans, which would be the HMON and the HWRF. So it's really going to come down to, at least for southern Texas, Brownsville, like someone's asking, where that spread really lines up and adjusts over the next day or so. So if you're there, I'd generally keep up to date with the latest information, or even for Louisiana, really, because if it really tries to stick to the eastern end, then you're still at the situation where more significant impacts are possible.
Somebody asked, will Jamaica get any impacts from either storm?
There is a somewhat of a possibility from Laura that Jamaica could get some impacts, especially if it tracks south of Cuba. Then Jamaica could possibly get some of the impacts. And from 14, it looks like that it is probably about to begin moving away from Jamaica. So then, yeah.
We actually had a question about a comment about the other disturbance, the AOI, which is moving off the coast of Africa, which we haven't mentioned yet, and you can see the some of it there, about to move over the Cape Verde Islands. Any thoughts on this? Because it had a higher chance earlier and it's now decreased, I understand.
yeah. Currently, the NHE is giving it a 20/20 chance right now, which and it was doing a lot better. I think at its max, I think it was at 50%, if I'm not mistaken. However, yeah, it looks like it's not as organized as it was expected to be at this point. So,
yeah, I mean, the 8 p.m. update specifically notes that while some development's possible in the next 48 hours or so, that it's going to be entering more hostile conditions as it moves further west, which is going to limit the odds of development.
Yeah.
So right now, really, I mean, fortunately, that means we likely won't have to deal with another system other than these two right now. And already this very active Atlantic hurricane season, we already got enough on our hands with 2 storms with the warnings in effect. And someone put it really nicely, and thank you so much, Terrence Lee, for the contribution that people in the Gulf Coast from Florida to Texas really should be staying on guard for the system, or either of them, really.
They'll probably be on guard for the rest of the year.
Yes.
At this rate, yeah. But, that's really the right sentiment to have. It is important to note that both intensity forecasts are unfortunately less confidence than usual because of the complex interactions that these things are going to be having in the short term with land and then later on potentially with each other for more 14L and Laura. But 14L is also going to be dealing with another trough that's going to be trying to come in as well from the western part of the United States, and that's going to prognosticate forecast intensities for it as well. So
Absolutely,
in
with
general,
the intensity forecast, not just the islands there, but the storm's proximity to each other. You're talking about energy transfers and competition between these two storms if they get too close together. And models have been toing and froing at times, developing one system and then the other one and then back to the first one. But most of them now are agreeing on Laura.
yeah, that's really coming into the increasing consensus. But, unfortunately, even for Laura, in terms of the intensity forecast, it's really odd potential land interactions over the next couple days with higher mountain terrains in the Greater Antilles make even that intensity forecast less clear in the short term, let alone, moving out further days. Because what's going to matter a lot for the system when it enters the Gulf is what its exact structure even is. If it's, alive at that point, with a nice core and it's moved north of Hispaniola and is able to intensify more easily, or if it moves through Hispaniola and Cuba and really struggles and potentially falls apart. So that range of possibilities is why people need to be watching both systems very closely if you're along the Gulf Coast or in southern Florida over the next several days, just so you can stay up to date with the latest information and see which outcomes become more likely for your exact area.
More questions here. Chances of rapid intensification of either storm?
I mean, once this thing gets in, once either one of
It genuinely depends on whether it makes that land interaction with Hispaniola and Cuba. Because if it does, we could expect a weak tropical storm to emerge out into the Gulf.
But you're all thinking that it's more likely to be Laura.
Yes.
Yes, probably.
Yeah, at this current state.
If one were to be stronger and have a better chance of intensifying quickly in the Gulf of Mexico, it would be Laura, specifically because even though 14L is forecast to become a minimal hurricane right now at around day 3, as the NHC's forecast discussion specifically says, that 14L is likely to be blasted by 30 to 40 knots of southwesterly shear as we head towards days 3 to 4, which at least for wind speeds means that it's going to struggle a lot more, even as it's in its final legs towards potentially Texas, Louisiana, in very warm waters otherwise. So to answer someone's question about Laura potentially being way stronger than expectations, because shear is really expected to be extremely high,
it's
as
very
it approaches
rare.
landfall, it'd be very unlikely.
Very rare to get a storm making landfall in places like Texas and Louisiana at peak intensity.
I will say, though, because that shear is going to be coming off and pushing convection to the north and east of the center, that means impacts could be extending outside where really the cone shows right now. So you could have a system make landfall in, north central Texas, but rainfall from it extends significantly into Louisiana if you have a lot of southwesterly shear coming in and trying to push convection off to the north and east of the center. So even if you're not in the cone of uncertainty for 14L right now, keep an eye on it for potential rainfall impacts down the line in general.
Will Houston get hit hard by 14L?
It definitely can't be ruled out.
Yeah, currently
it definitely could get major impacts. I mean, it could be from very minor to very major. I mean, it's very uncertain.
Yeah, it's a rather broad system. Do you think it could be a rain problem like we've seen in the past?
Yes.
It's probably more of a rain problem. Definitely.
It's certainly going to be a rain problem for Texas coast and potentially the Louisiana coastline, but whether it's tropical or not is the big question.
Yeah, it's more likely than not, considering the current forecast, especially when you have shear picking up at the end, that this will mostly be a rain threat for the United States. Even if it's not the strongest storm, you got to keep in mind that 90% of the deaths from tropical cyclones occur from flooding, not wind. So even though a lot of discussion and media talk is about the exact wind speeds, there's a lot more really risk on the rainfall side. So keep an eye out on those rainfall forecasts for your areas and see how they change in the upcoming days.
And people do love to hang on to those wind speed numbers so much.
Mm-hmm. And for coastal eastern Texas, the Weather Prediction Center is forecasting 4 to 5 inches of rain in that area.
And what about southeast Louisiana, the odds of a major hurricane?
I would say it's feasible.
Yeah, it's possible.
It's feasible, but it's too early to say anything in terms of percentage odds certainties for that particular area when the landfall spot is still over 5 days out right now, at least, barely. But with more uncertainty for its intensity in the near term land interaction and even in the Gulf of Mexico with potential more complex interactions with other active tropical cyclones, anything specific would be more speculation than based on full current knowledge. So I would implore you and people watching this in Louisiana along the Gulf Coast worried about Laura or 14L just because of the underlying uncertainties with both of them to stay up to date with the latest situations and news regarding both systems and watch their developments very closely over the next several days.
Yeah.
Questions about whether Laura could do basically what Ike did. Well, let's not forget that Ike at this point was strengthening and became a Category 4 near the Turks and Caicos Islands. So that's one big difference right there.
Yeah, it's probably not the best analog because this system is still, at least if you're talking about Laura, not very well defined at this point in time and could still be going through another center relocation. So not really the best comparison to make, although, like obviously was a very strong and notable storm nonetheless. If we're talking, analogs, it's harder to pin one down exactly with the changes that we're seeing right now. I'm sure our cyclone historians will be able to get a really good one. But Ike had formed significantly further east, was much further north in this system, and avoided any interaction with Hispaniola for the most part, and came down south into Cuba from the open North Atlantic basin before moving into the Gulf of Mexico and coming into Texas. This is a system that's already well south and west of that, which is already way weaker at its current location than Ike was respectively. So very different situations and not really the best comparison.
We're also now joined by Devon. Hello, good evening.
Good evening to everyone.
And you finally got a decent connection there.
Oh, well, I'm not calling you from my car, and my car is kind of in a body shop right now, so yeah.
Right. Let's not talk about that. We'll get back to you in just a moment, but first I just want to discuss with the two people from Florida in this room right now and how things are going over there at the minute, people's attitudes. I ask this quite often. What are people thinking about these storms? We've seen one or two comments that people are already rushing to stores, stocking up.
Yeah, that is true. Here in the Pensacola area, people are already beginning to go to stores and stuff. In fact, like we saw today at Walmart, there was a huge line out the door for people just waiting to get stuff. It's not normally like that busy, so.
No, of course.
Yeah, and I have talked to some family members, and they are considering putting up shutters depending on what the exact tract is. So it is definitely, people are definitely preparing for this in this area.
Yucatan?
Yeah, it's sort of similar to what you're saying. My parents actually before, and honestly, just like I've been telling them that our area is we're in Florida. Honestly, you're progressed for a couple of percent. I'm not saying if more.
We're struggling a bit too much with that signal at the moment, I'm afraid. But Devon, you've been looking at these storms for quite a while. Well, only one of them is actually a storm at the moment. What do you think about the National Hurricane Center's thinking behind both of them becoming hurricanes?
Oh, I don't think. Here's the thing. In regards to both of them becoming hurricanes, is that they're mutually exclusive. Obviously, they're not both going to be hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico at the same time. It's pretty much impossible for that to happen. The Gulf of Mexico is not large enough to support two systems being hurricanes at the same time. You wouldn't think, anyways. If two storms get too close together, usually the stronger one ends up shearing off the weaker one due to a stronger outflow. And especially when storms are that close, you usually see some sort of Fujiwara interaction. Like you practically say that there would be maybe 150 miles between the two systems. Not much larger than that. So I think it's safe to say that we wouldn't have simultaneous hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico.
It's not going to. Okay.
However, the reason why they're predicting both storms become hurricanes is because we don't know which one of the storms are going to become a hurricane. So you have to predict both. Most of the models now are pretty much saying 14L is going to be a weak storm and Laura is going to be the stronger one. We'll figure that out when time gets there, obviously. We're waiting for 14L to pass her by Mexico and then see what it does in the Gulf of Mexico. And then Laura, of course, has to deal with the Greater Antilles. Since it's decided to, looks like it's going to pass south of Puerto Rico.
Yes.
That's not very conductive for Laura's development, and that means that it's basically going to be taking Hispaniola head on, apply directly to the forehead.
And then you've got the hurricane watch for part of Mexico. So National Hurricane Center are obviously expecting significant intensification right now from 14L. Apparently they're pretty baffled that it hasn't.
Well, that's what happens when you have a broad and disorganized low in the northwestern Caribbean. And this thing looks awful. Honestly, both of these systems look awful.
They don't look great.
14L in particular is, you can see the upper level anti-cyclone seems to be pretty decent, but despite that, the thing is that in order for a storm to take advantage of its environment, it's got to have the well-defined center. And 14L is yet to have that. So,
and you look at Laura as well, and it's struggling too. I'm struggling to see where the center is on that one. You got a few areas where you might suggest it, but I'm not totally clear on this.
Yeah, this might end up being another Isaias situation.
That's what I thought at the very start, really.
Honestly, this might be another Isaias situation where we're going to have one low-level circulation enter into the Caribbean and die, and then have a new low-level circulation form to the north of Puerto Rico, and that skirts by Hispaniola. Pretty sure that's what the HWRF is actually expecting out of this storm right now.
Wow.
So don't be surprised if that ends up, and if that does end up happening, that's going to be some bad news, because then we're going to have likely what's going to be a hurricane moving through the Florida Strait, and that's no. That's a big no on that.
Yeah, not in late August.
One wants to see. No.
What's happened so far, and this is really why that could, be ongoing again, is 2 or 3 times already, and I'm sure, Devin, you've seen this as well. The original low-level center has raced away from the main convection, and then the mid-level center spun down a new one, which is why you've seen them really kind of pull left and right the exact center. And they were saying in their some of their earlier forecast discussions specifically that where they're putting the center was a midpoint agreement between where the old center was and where a new one could be forming. So it is really just a very complex situation.
Both of these storms are extremely complex right now, and I don't think that there's anything that's going to. There's nothing indicating to me that that either of these storms are going to immediately spin up overnight. Like they got it. If I've seen some decent looking tropical depressions out there where it's like, hey, this already has like a half of a core going, it just doesn't have tropical storm force winds yet. This is obviously, already halfway there to the stage of rapid intensification. We're not even close to that stage for either of these storms, at least from what I've been able to see on microwave and on satellite imagery here. National Hurricane Center, especially with the ship's rapid intensification index, indicating that, there's a pretty decent chance at a hurricane here. I can see why they throw the hurricane watch up. Makes sense to me. Especially, and with the TD going through, you can expect to see some tropical storm force gusts. There's your tropical storm warning criteria.
Wasn't it
So,
like a few days ago a 51% chance of one of them being a hurricane by now?
no. It was a 51% chance of 14L being a major in 72 hours, and that was 48 hours ago.
Oh dear.
Well, that doesn't
Um,
look too likely anymore.
Yeah, it's that's we guessed heads and landed on tails on that one, which is a good thing.
Yep.
So we definitely won that bet, but I'm most concerned right now about 13L, obviously, especially with the way that the mesoscale tropical models have been developing it. The HWRF and HMON runs particularly are concerning. However, the global models aren't necessarily saying that it's going to be too strong. The CMC has a really interesting solution where it basically just says it's just going to cut right through the entire Greater Antilles, a la a Frederick or Georges, and then enter into the Gulf of Mexico and strengthen. And I know that the CMC has actually been one of the better models this year. So is that something that could occur? We could be taking a look at that, but all of our modeling right now is really hurting because of the lack of flights currently going on in the world. Thank you, coronavirus. But besides that, basically we don't have any good data for any of these storms until we fly a plane into them, which is crazy to think.
Well, yes, it's like we're back in the 1950s.
Well, I wouldn't say we've gone that far back, but I would say that we've stepped back into the 90s at least.
Oh, there
with
we
the
go.
amount of data that we've got.
Anyway, hey, comments about the Western Pacific Depression. This is TD9. The GFS model wants a major typhoon to slam into South Korea next week.
That's something that's literally never happened before, is it? I've never heard of that happening.
There's definitely been Category 2s, yeah. And they've been
but
retired, so it's not good news.
But those Category 2s were stronger and then weakened to Category 2 upon landfall.
Yes.
From what I understand, this tropical depression is expected to strengthen all the way until a Korean Peninsula landfall.
Pretty much.
To my knowledge, has never happened before, and I think that's a little spooky.
The latest GFS run has 945 millibars right before a landfall at 108 hours per the 18Z run. And the Joint Typhoon Warning Center even has this at 96 hours just south of Jeju Island at 105 knots, so 120 miles an hour sustained winds, heading due north for a beeline towards the western coast of South Korea, or at least the southwest coast of it. Day 5.
Oh, that's absolutely insane.
Yeah, Day 5 point is a 90 knot or 100 mile an hour Category 2 typhoon right next to Seoul right now. So that's the consensus forecast right now from the JTWC.
That's absolutely insane. And that's a JTWC doing that, so that's a conservative forecast.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of things going on right now.
We got problems, that's for sure. And if this does go south as well, there'll be 3 systems then to be closely looking at, and we'll probably have another stream fired up somewhere on our channel. Very busy round here. We've got 4 streams active at the moment, including this one. We've also got the 24-hour live stream covering world tropics on our channel on Force 13, and you can follow live satellite imagery close-ups of Tropical Depression 14 and Laura on our US branch. Search Force 13 US. But let's see if we can take some more questions. We're here for another 15 minutes, so we're going to make it an hour-long production once again tonight. Let's see what we've got right now. Where are we? Could 14L go through rapid intensification?
Well, I think I pretty much just covered that.
Yeah, it's not particularly likely anymore. And
No,
even though
Well, here's a clearer question then: will it pull a Harvey?
No.
almost
No.
Nope.
almost
Nope.
certainly not. We're not expecting this storm to
No.
stall anywhere. We're not expecting either of these storms to stall anywhere at this time.
Yeah.
There's no model
No.
that would suggest that there's going to be a stalling of either of these two storms. So we're not going to see a Harvey. We're not going to see a Dorian. Both of these guys are going to be moving at a pretty decent clip.
Yeah, and I would note, just with both of them as well, really quickly, for 14L, as it moves further into the Gulf of Mexico, it's really going to encounter very heavy wind shear. So if anything, it could weaken significantly before an end landfall. Of course, it doesn't discount the potential rainfall threat. But the interesting note, even though the National Hurricane Center is forecasting both to become hurricanes right now, 14L and Tropical Storm Laura, it doesn't forecast them to be hurricanes in the Gulf at the same time. It actually weakens 14L back into a tropical storm before Laura enters and becomes a hurricane. So they're really threading a needle with both of these, just because of how complex the situation really is right now.
And maybe something like that is possible if these storms end up pretty equal, where you get the 14L being a hurricane and then weakening to a TS and allowing Laura to become a hurricane. They might only peak as Category 1s, but the more likely scenario at the moment is that more of the energy will arrive at Laura's feet, as it were, and if it survives those islands, then it might have a decent run in the Gulf of Mexico and the Florida Straits. One of 14L's problems here right now is looking a bit disjointed on the satellite imagery, almost Colin-like actually. Is it too broad for its own good?
Well, if you have to ask that question, it is. Honestly, if you have to ask that question, it is. It's pretty simple. You need to have, like I said, in order for rapid intensification to occur, like most people are, well, I shouldn't say most people, but like the NHC are potentially anticipating here, you got to have a tight core. This storm does not. I don't see any indication that one's going to be forming at this time. Of course, things can change quickly. We could wake up 12 hours from now and it could be looking like, hey, this thing might go rapid intensification 12 hours and might become a hurricane at the Yucatan Peninsula. There's still plenty of time for it. I think it's got another 36 hours over water. And plus, this thing also seems to be moving east of forecast almost.
Yeah, I mean, it could actually try to follow the HMON track and avoid a direct landfall on the Yucatan Peninsula.
When I hear HMON, I know it's going to be a bad thing, whatever. I've not even seen it.
I'm not talking about the intensity, though. I'm just talking about the location track.
What is it saying, though, the HMON?
Oh, it tries to ramp... The last I saw, it tried to ramp 14L up significantly at the as it heads into the Gulf as a hurricane, which isn't too likely anywhere to be any significant hurricane at that point, like the HMON tries to suggest. But it could try to miss a landfall in the Yucatan Peninsula. The latest NHC forecast cone has it barely skirting the northeastern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. And the cone of uncertainty definitely shows that avoiding a landfall could be possible. And to Devin's note about how broad the system is, that means that even though it is only a tropical depression, that more significant rainfall with it is extending well away from the center of the storm, well into portions of Cuba.
Right now you've got showers and thunderstorms, and you can see it on satellite imagery here. You can see showers and thunderstorms, developing over the Yucatan Peninsula. You can even see some showers and thunderstorms with its influence developing over Honduras right now. And then, of course, you've got the couple of thunderstorms that blew up at around 2300 Z just to the north of Cuba. There was actually a pretty decent line of storms right there. So, yeah, I mean, this storm is it's pretty much dominating the entire weather pattern of the Western Caribbean right now.
And even though it's moving generally away from much of the Caribbean and Central America, generally to the west, northwest, and northwest, adverse impacts, just because of how broad this thing are going to extend well to the east of the center, probably at least overnight for some places. So Cuba, portion of Central America, and even some outflow heading up into the southeastern United States could be seeing some rainfall that's in some way associated with the system for at least the next several hours at minimum. And localized flash flooding is, of course, a concern when you see pretty heavier rainfall coming down in a short time period, which is possible with some of these squalls.
Do we have any more recon news right now?
Yes, we do.
We do?
Recon flew through the eastern side, and they found a few points of winds above 35 knots. A couple of them are marked as suspect as FMR, but there are a few that are not rain contaminated nor suspect.
And that's in Tropical Depression 14.
Yes, it is.
Interesting.
Yeah, and in Laura, it looks like that Recon is really struggling to find a well-defined center of circulation.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, not surprised in that at all.
They're also struggling to find tropical storm force winds at flight level, although they have not sampled the area of deepest convection yet.
Well, there's not much of an area to sample, honestly. But, I just like to point out this point right now is that you go ahead and pull up, because I mentioned earlier that you take a look at Laura, you take a look at Tropical Depression 14, they don't necessarily look that healthy. Meanwhile, you go ahead and you pull up satellite imagery for Tropical Depression 9 in the Western Pacific. That thing looks terrifying already. You can already see that there's a hint of a central core forming with the thing. You can see the massive banding structure already forming on the thing. Like right now, its issues, it's got land interaction with the mountains of Taiwan, but once it moves away from there, it's got a steady path of strengthening. So models might not be crazy with this thing strengthening for quite a while here. Like that looks like a tropical depression that's going to be able to rapidly intensify. So you can see the difference here between a healthy 30-knot tropical depression and two rather unhealthy ones.
Even though one of them's a tropical storm.
Well, to be honest, even though we got Recon, at least one of the earlier passes, saying that Laura's a tropical storm, to Devin's point, 09W in the Western Pacific definitely looks more impressive than it by not really a small margin, While Laura's had its low-level center continuously race away from the main convective activity of the system in the mid-level center, 9W, and you can see whenever we go to that, visible imagery, a really tight core, which could allow the system to intensify up to a Category 3 typhoon strength system before making landfall in South Korea. So that's definitely a very real concern right now. Especially now that the models are still saying that despite having a better grasp on its movement. Yesterday, there was a lot more volatility in expectations for where it could go. A lot of models are trying to pull it out towards sea and then really jerk it back hard to the north and west towards Kyushu and South Korea. The fact that they're still so on board with a very high intensity system, despite much higher certainty and consensus with the track, is definitely something to be very worried about. And if you're in Japan and South Korea, particularly Kyushu for Japan, to monitor developments with the tropical depression very closely.
Now, ASCAP will be reaching that area soon. And I'm really curious about this. Look carefully near the coast of southern Japan. Something that we marked a few days ago and is there right now spinning away. Could that be a potential other cyclone?
Yeah, didn't we give it like 10% chance when we marked it?
Everyone seeing that?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. I see it there. It's right south of, Osaka, almost.
Pretty much.
But, I mean, it looks... You could make an argument that it looks better defined, at least, than Laura right now.
Whoa.
But the HWC I'm not saying in strength or anything like that. I'm just talking about the cloud structure, okay?
Right.
Laura's really a disjointed mess. Notably, though, the JTWC haven't even marked this as an area of interest for development. So the odds of this actually really becoming anything, significant are very slim, despite its not terrible satellite appearance.
Just thought I'd bring that to everyone's attention there. Let's see if we've got any more questions. Do we think that Laura could slow down? Well, it should do, shouldn't it?
I mean, overall, it is expected to move at a generally quick pace over the next 3 days or so. There's not too much disagreement within the models or that. It could slow down and forward speed a bit later on in the forecast period, in between days 4 and 5. Not stall at all. Don't get me wrong when I'm talking about that. But it could at least slow down its forward movement speed a little bit at that point. Although, we're still talking about a system where we don't really know exactly what it's going to look like at all at that point. So, if it's much weaker or much stronger than anticipated based on all the complex potential land interactions, that outcome could vary significantly as well.
Let's see if we can take a look at sea surface temperatures. There's no guarantee that this is up to date, unfortunately, but I'll have to take a look with my bare eyes. It should be fairly up to date, this image. So you're looking at a lot of warm sea surface temperatures. You're looking at 28, 30 degrees there in the Western Caribbean, basically where 14L is, into the Gulf of Mexico. Very warm indeed. Trying to figure out whether that's 30 degrees plus in there. I think it is. Yeah, 30 degrees there over all of the Gulf of Mexico, pretty much, apart from the very southern part along the coast of Mexico. And up the Gulf Stream as well, off Florida, off Georgia, South Carolina, 30 degrees in little pockets there, and between the Bahamas and Bermuda as well. Very warm waters all around there, and that looks like it's going to be the breeding ground for potential tropical cyclone activity and maybe some long tracking recurvature hurricanes. And looking in the Western Pacific there, right ahead of Tropical Depression 9, 30 degree waters extending almost to the Korean Peninsula, Devon.
Whoa.
Almost.
That's definitely spooky. I don't know if that's normal or not. You'd have to show me an anomaly chart. I don't know.
Yeah, the anomaly one is really old. This was ages ago, and I believe it's showing that, well, in that image it's about 2 or 3 degrees above average. It's probably 3 to 4 right now.
That's significant.
I mean, just the fact that you have 3 to 4 degrees Celsius above average means that
I'll
normally...
just double check that for everyone.
I wouldn't be surprised if that's continuously held, but, if that really verifies up all the way to 09W's passage in that area, that means that typically we see sea surface temperatures closer to, 25 to 27 degrees Celsius, and that would allow, a much stronger storm to really have to wind down some of its convective activity. It just wouldn't be as supportive. If you have waters that warm, and the shear is also favorable at that time, which is generally forecast to be the case, it's not forecast to be particularly harmful for the system or high as it moves in that direction in that area at around days 4 to 5, it's going to be much harder to see the system actually properly weaken, which is a major concern. Yeah,
looking at it now off the Korean Peninsula and off the southern part of the Japanese islands, around 3 degrees above average as a general rule there. The rest of the Western Pacific is about 1 to 2 degrees over. The Eastern Pacific's pretty balanced, given that the La Nina is still present. Although, interestingly, off the western part of Baja California, another area of 2 to 3 degrees above average, which probably helped Genevieve for a while. The Gulf of Mexico about 1 degree over, and in the Western Atlantic 1 to 2 generally, but warmer anomalies, although not necessarily warmer temperatures, but higher anomalies off Atlantic Canada.
Yeah, that's typical for the pattern that we're seeing. That we would have significant temperature anomalies in the Gulf Stream off of Atlantic Canada. That's not too. That's something to be expected. Yeah, that's
Okay.
pretty typical for the type of pattern that we're in.
I will say a lot of it's gone unnoticed just because a lot of eyes have stayed on the Atlantic Basin through this month. Just because we've had, another 3 named storms so far,
Crazy.
potentially the 4th one coming in the next 24 hours or so if the NHC forecast verifies out. And if that recon data is what they use, it's likely we actually see the 4th one tonight. There was 38 knot SFMRs unflagged and multiple ones above 34 knots that weren't flagged either. So it's likely that
So-
14L is probably upgraded at the next update.
Here we go
But
again.
irrespective of all the activity in the Atlantic and, actually having some stronger hurricanes in the Eastern Pacific, the Western Pacific's had 7 systems this month so far.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that's really gone under the radar because
Not doing so badly.
3 of them right now were, minimal typhoons that only really strengthened the last few hours before
Yes.
landfall into China. So, and they only lasted as, systems tracked for about a day and a half or so each. So the Western Pacific's really trying to come back from the worst July it's had in over 130 years.
It was indeed.
really was.
We're finishing up now. I'm sorry about that. But we will have much more continuous coverage tomorrow. It's because we're trying to get all of our threads back together here. I've just been away for a while, but we'll get things sorted out thoroughly tomorrow. In the meantime, we've got the automated feeds, our live 24-hour stream output on the Force 13 main channel, and the 2 close-ups of 14L and Laura live satellite imagery. You can find that on the Force 13 US channel now, and they'll be running throughout the night tonight. Any final words?
Stay safe.
Just stay safe, stay prepared, and keep an eye on the tropics, like always.
Like
Yeah.
always.
The only thing I have to say is that, Laura, I hope you die.
Good night from us. We'll see you again tomorrow.
See ya.